to the No Dose podcast, a platform dedicated to curating conversations that inspire and uplift, challenging all kingdom creators everywhere to draw near and play their part in flooding the culture with light by making art that makes room for the expression of God's glory and points a generation's hearts back to God.
Through conversations with various artists, culture shapers, and patrons of the arts, from all walks of life, we aim to empower kingdom creators toward greater creativity and effective storytelling with excellence while building community, sharing our ideas, and shaping the culture.
How you been?
There's a lot going on.
Right?
Yeah, there's a lot going on. So we're going to talk about worship, and that's actually, as I say these words, it's probably exactly what we need right now. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of thoughts we can explore. I'd love to know, as we have been thinking about this even for a couple of weeks, what's emerged for you. But I know so many times when there is kind of chaos swirling around, and I think also in terms of engaging in art and creating anything artwork that's of value, there's this cultivation of worship, or this experience of worship that really lifts you out of the noise and all of the pain or the frustrations or whatever else is going on, to look at something magnificent and beautiful. Where for me, there's been so many times where I just forget, where I see myself in a perspective that's like, okay, settle down. There's something far more majestic, and when you behold it in worship, there's a lot of power in that. So, but before kind of just go big concept, like when we started discussing this, what were some of the ideas that were emerging for you in terms of this whole, how do we engage, or how do we approach the idea of worship in the art that we create or the art that we partake in?
Right. There's so many aspects of this topic to explore, right? Mm-hmm. But I'll start off by saying that I recently had this understanding that we're actually built to worship, mm-hmm. right? From the minute we wake up in the morning, we start to look around us for things to worship, mm-hmm. right? Even the way that our senses are placed, the senses we do have, the minute I wake up in the morning, I want to reach for something to look at, mm-hmm. whether it's out the window to see how beautiful the day is, or my phone to see what's going on my phone, or something to behold, mm-hmm. that's going to call me to a position of like being inspired for the day or looking forward to something. Mm-hmm. So you realize that you're constantly wanting to feel, to taste, to hear, to be stimulated, right? So we're built to actually adore and worship.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, then comes the responsibility to steward that worship, and to channel it, right, towards something that is actually soul building, and that is important, that is beneficial and helpful. Mm-hmm. And making that concerted effort from the minute you wake up in the morning till you lay your head down on the pillow again, and to consciously do that is work. Mm-hmm. You don't just nail it just because you've done it for a couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah. This actually connects to a lot of things I've been thinking about lately, just from my own personal life. I've been looking at myself and asking, how do I what is it to be set apart, in a sense?
Yeah.
Set apart from the world, because I'm not looking to I don't think being set apart is like going and creating like a commune out in the middle of nowhere and that kind of being a set apart to isolate ourselves from the realm of filmmaking or whatever it is we're doing, but in a spiritual sense. And for me, it is being a lot more setting my mind apart, setting my spirit apart, as much as possible from the nature of how the world is operating around us, which is just consume. And it's a lot of a steady diet of empty calories, and just sort of a lot of the stuff, social media is the main culprit of this, of just like a lot of fear-based things, a lot of things that actually don't cultivate the depth that I need for myself, in order to create something that I think as an artist, I need to be spending a lot more time cultivating that depth. So, I mean, I can't spend all day just consuming TikTok videos and expect to output the Sistine Chapel. So in order to, right? So if I'm going to really want to create something as an artist that's meaningful and lasting, I can't operate in the same function that everyone is just sort of being drawn into. And it's just like, you can't expect to be a bodybuilder if you're just eating junk food all day.
Yeah.
And for me, it's just like, okay, how do I create a little more clarity and discipline around my spirit and my heart and my connection to God, and not even rely on hey, I need to watch all these movies that people tell me I have to watch as a filmmaker, but to do something more of a spiritual operation and trust that throughout time, many artists were just more in tune with God and maybe nature or just the world He's given us. And then from there, see what kind of bold artistry can emerge, and trusting Him in that.
Yeah. To add to that, I then was thinking about the power of our worship, how the culture monitors what we worship and then sells us what we worship most, right?
Yeah.
And eventually starts to manipulate what we buy and consume by adjusting or turning up the heat on what we worship. So essentially we can change the consciousness that we're being oppressed by right now to something more idyllic and something more positive and uplifting if we take more responsibility for what we're worshiping. Because right now, all the content that's out there is sedating us into a place of passivity and just feeling like, I didn't start the fire. It was always burning since the world's been turning. Why is it on me? It's not on me to change it. Like we've just become so placid and so docile.
Yeah.
And we really need an awakening, because also you start to look like what you worship. To your point about you can't consume TikTok all day and then output the Sistine Chapel, right? Like you start to look like what you worship, and you start to sound like what you worship.
Right.
And then again, it takes me back to how we're built. We're built like that. The minute we input stuff for a certain period of time and consistently, that's what starts to come out of us. So if we don't like what's coming out of us and the people around us, we really can change it by changing what we behold consistently.
And the one, like this in small steps, is like, for me, it's like I'm now wanting to just put a little more effort into actually going to an art gallery, and actually just putting really the phone away and taking time just to sit with something that someone put their heart and soul into, crafting something that's, maybe I do or don't like it, but it's like taking time with something and space with something that another artist has made. Even these days, people will say like, "Oh, I'm not going to watch a movie. That's like 3 hours of my time." But then, we can waste 3 hours doing nothing. Where it's like, I mean, I love movies because it's really setting aside a time to give yourself to something, pay attention to something as a beginning and an end. And being mindful again of like, I'm going to consciously make a decision that I'm going to engage in something that is just basically creating me as a worshiper to be a better worshiper, and in fact, then create something hopefully that points people towards worship of God, through my own work. So that's just one thing that I'm just trying to be more mindful of. I can just get caught up in so much of the stuff. And as you said, if we start to do this person by person, believer by believer, the world kind of has to, this, based on these algorithms or whatever, there are a lot of followers of just like, hey, this is what people want. Let's give them what they want.
Right.
And they're going to be like, oh, wait, maybe their appetites are changing. We need to adjust to them. And that's sort of the waves that we can actually shape our culture.
Yeah.
And saying, hey, we're going to be these kinds of people. We're going to, again, just provide something that's not just something you take and throw away, but something that you spend time with and share together.
Yeah. And to add to that point about starting to consume other artists' work and taking yourself to an art gallery, I'm reminded of an artist and an author called Julia Cameron. She wrote a series of books called The Artist's Way.
Yeah.
And I read them when I was in my 20s, and I adopted some tools from her teachings that I still practice today. And the first one is an artist date, where you take your artist on a weekly date. Yeah, where you just go out somewhere on your own and you're taking yourself out on a date.
Yeah.
And the second one is morning pages, which I still do. I still do morning pages.
Yeah.
And it's over the years, and shout out to Julia Cameron for this, because it's remarkable what it does in one's life. And the artist date specifically, I heard someone say that if you fill your mind and your soul with beautiful things, you give God something to work with, right? Or you give your talents something to work with. So one thing I've noticed as well, or the morning pages have taught me, is that I really cannot grow in something unless I give it attention. Like, I want to be a great writer, right? Like, I love writing, and I've been writing my whole life, but I'm always wanting to take my writing to a new level of growth, right?
Yeah.
And I want it to sound and feel a certain way.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I'll recognize when I arrive there, because, you know, as a writer, every time you see your stuff, you're like, oh, there's that mediocre voice again. I still do that, you know.
Yeah.
Some days I'm like, this is awful.
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? And some days I'm like, oh, what was that? Where did that come from? Right.
Yeah.
But just from doing morning pages all these years, I've really learned the value of consistently showing up to something and rewarding yourself with the effort and focused effort in improving it. And you really start to see the results of that. And sometimes I'm guilty. I'll have sat on the phone scrolling through TikTok or Instagram for like an hour, and I'll, at the end of it, feel really terrible.
Yeah.
Not because I'm just guilty, but chemically I can feel something shifted.
Sure,
like,
yeah. Right.
I just did something that was not uplifting, and now my body is telling me that, and it's indicating to me that what I just consumed wasn't great.
Yeah.
And the other times when I'm consuming what I do want to consume, or putting effort into growing the things I do want to grow, the effect is instant as well. You know, and somehow we forget that.
Yeah. And I can get pulled into, I'm seeing other artists put out like a beautiful photograph or something like that. And that's like, oh, that's cool. And it's inspiring. But it can become just like this vortex at some point. And I think for me, none of that has like actually led me to writing the script that I want to write. It's really just like when I put that away and I spend a week just writing, 3 hours a day or whatever it is, and trusting that I can release sort of like this mode of I need to input more art so I can make more art, or just like media or whatever it is, or watch all these movies about, if I want to make like a Western or something, I have to watch every single Western that's ever been made. And at some point there's a capacity that it's like, well, if I have something inside of me that's saying, write a Western, Jesse, just, I've already taken in enough of that, and I'm sure I can keep learning, but go write it, go be in it, go be in that space, and trust like there's something that is active in me to get moving and get creating, rather than sort of like, this is just my experience of just like, oh, I need to keep consuming more and more and more because I don't want to get it wrong. So that can happen to me. Whereas like when I let a lot of that go and I just put myself, all right, in kind of that surrender, and the discipline of it, then things, then it gives this room for it to emerge and actually develop what I need to write in my own voice, and actually trust God in like that little discomfort space of like, well, I'm just in this void of creativity here with you, God. I'm trying to create something, but I'm going to wrestle with this until I start getting to where I need to go.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of how the other day I was thinking about how depending on how much time we're spending in our secret place with God, right? That close proximity with him, that consistent. Oh, I know what made me think about it. What made me think about it was how God called Moses his friend, right? And I was marveling at what an honor it is for God to call someone his friend, right? And how that would mean that Moses spent enough time with God for God to eventually call him his friend. And that depending on how much time you're spending with your friend will determine how quickly you are able to decipher what they're telling you. So depending on how much time I'm spending in my secret place, that'll determine how much I'm able to open up that channel to receive creative inspiration from the Holy Spirit, right?
Yeah.
And if I've just been dipping in and out like a quick 5-minute prayer for the past couple of days and really not taking time to just soak in, and then suddenly I have to write something and create something or perform something, and now I'm like, oh, please God, please help me with this thing. Like, it for me again points out why worship is important. Worship is important because it consistently points us back to what are my heart's intentions? What's motivating me? Why do I want to be good at this? Why do I want to make this, right? So it really, how much time I spend worshiping and how I worship influences how I make my art and for what reason I want to make it. So really just understanding that proximity to God, focused proximity that I make, it's that sacrifice of worship, right? Because sometimes it is a sacrifice. Like some days I can't even open my mouth to worship because I'm feeling so much angst about something, or I'm in agony about something, or the frustration is overwhelming me. And the point that getting to that point of then surrendering myself to God in worship is a sacrifice, and I can feel it. I can feel myself having to command this wretched man that I am to get down on my knees and worship the King of Kings.
You'd mentioned in one of our text threads the idea of a sacrifice of praise or sacrifice of worship, right? And as you're saying, it is like I'll go sometimes to church and I'm in a mood or something. I got all my problems, my bills or whatever this. And I don't really want to be there, but it's like, all right, I'm going because I think this is who I am. This is part of my life. This is my routine. And then when I lay that down and just in a moment of worship and praise, God just takes it away. Right. And it's just, and as I said in the very beginning, it's huge. All that burden is just lifted, and I get to see something, when I'm engaging him and just worshiping him for who he is, not just what he gives me. Or what he's going to do for me, but just like that is beauty. That is, this is the infinite, and I get to just get a taste of it, and that just takes all that pressure all the smallness that I'm looking at, and worship becomes, it's a little bit of a sacrifice to get my mouth open and start, get the words out of my mouth, but he's always faithful to just meet me and expand me, and then. It just kind of make me think of, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the quote from Dostoevsky of beauty will save the world. And sometimes it's just enough to see something beautiful. And when we look at something and it's so overwhelmingly beautiful, standing at the ocean or standing over, like looking down over a valley in the mountains, and it's so much beauty that it's overwhelming, and it just sweeps away all the smallness of your conditions. And so that is kind of how worship transforms me. And art has that power when it's really something that touches in that spirit, that when I watch a movie and I'm just like, I'm taken out of my smallness and out of my, that's a lot of times when we go to the movies, we want to kind of like forget our problems, but, more than just forgetting them and like some kind of disposable entertainment, but like something that actually expands us and helps us see how much beauty and incredible vastness, or even the small intricacies of little things that we don't notice of human relationships. That's the kind of worship that I think great art can inspire.
Yeah.
And it's communal too, which I think is even the next level of, worship is not only just like a personal thing, but C.S. Lewis talks about this, that our worship of something is actually consummated when we share it. So
that's beautiful.
You hear a song that you love, but it's not totally complete until you share it with somebody and they're like, oh, that is amazing. Wow. And you're praising it together. It's actually creating that connection together. And that's what we do in the grand scheme of our church. Like, we're actually doing this together, and we're looking, oh, wow, look how beautiful God is. Look what he's done. Look at his character. And we worship that. And we're like, what do you do in your life? What do you do in your life?
Yeah.
So art is kind of a reflection of that when we do that as a community.
Right. What's become so convoluted now, especially in this day and age, is just the amount of self-worship that we have become so comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And how I'm just wondering, like, what that does to our art and the quality of art that we're producing, right? Because I feel like it's the lowest. We end up reaching for the lowest hanging fruit when we become the objects of our worship, and when we make our art and produce content and write and make films that are pleasing to us, or pleasing to the palates of the people we want approval and attention from, right? Because how are we then reaching for anything new, or how are we going deeper in any way? So self-worship is actually not even, before we even get to the place that we're taking worship away from the God that we should be worshiping, the one true God who is worthy of all our worship, we're self-worshipping to our detriment. There's just a shallowness that is a byproduct of self-worship, where there's really, how much can you focus on yourself for how long, and what comes out of that? Yeah.
I feel like that's something that I try not to. It's tricky, right? Because we're so inundated with this. This is now our world, and at the same time, I try not to assess people's intentions all the time. Of like, oh, I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing, but I think it's valuable to maybe just as a thought experiment, try to like wash away everything we've seen and just reimagine what would the world look like if no one was concerned about their self-worship or their self, elevating their brand, so to speak. And even for me, I think we talked about this, the first episode we recorded, which is, there can be, for me, it's just like, I really like having an identity as an artist. I like that a lot. It feels like that is me. But there can also just be very much in subtle ways of just like, this is the thing that I really want worshipped more than anything. For people to recognize me as like a certain kind of artist that fits within a certain realm. And then I get something from that, even if I'm not, have thousands and thousands and thousands of followers or something like that. There's still like this piece of me that, if I'm putting something out, I do hope that reflects on me in a certain way that I get that little juice from. But, do you have thoughts on this? Because I think this is worthwhile to just to provide. You're really good at fasting. You fast a lot, so there could be even like a thought of like fast from this spirit of self worship for a period, and just see what happens. See what God works in us.
I mean, I will say to you, every time I've switched everything off, including my stomach and its desires and its wants and its needs, and just focused all my attention on God, remarkable things have come out of my life, right? Like, there's so much that He's produced in my life. Earlier this year, I had this revelation, right? So the Bible says that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. My soul knows it full well. I don't quite remember where that scripture is. I'm not too good with that, but it says I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm skillfully wrought. My soul knows that full well. Yeah. And I thought to myself, if my soul knows how fearfully and wonderfully made I am, that means that is knowledge that was already placed there by my Creator. And so, how do I find out about these fearfully and wonderfully made things? I have to inquire, right? And I have to ask the Holy Spirit to search my soul and reveal to me what these things are that my soul knows full well. Because when you hear full well, it gives a sense of my soul is fully convinced by how fearfully and wonderfully made I am. So I now cognitively and intentionally want to draw this out, this knowledge out of myself. And the only way I can draw this knowledge out is by mining it and taking the time to just sit in stillness and seek it out. The Bible says it's the glory of God to conceal a matter and the glory of kings to search it out, right? How much time am I investing in searching out these matters that God has hidden for me to search out and seek out? And He hasn't hidden them because He loves hide and seek.
Right.
But He knows that there is as I pursue these things and as I search them out, the search is going to produce something in me that He's wanting to produce and He wants to see come out of me. And that's why I'm saying that every time I've set time aside to do that, I've been in awe of who God is and what He can do and what He has just waiting for me to come and discover. And I really pray that I spend the rest of my life discovering this stuff. I mean, I want to say that I want to leave no stone unturned, and I hope that by the time I take my last breath, I've sorted all out. But I'll leave that in God's hands.
Yeah. Some of the reason why, like the imagery that I've worked with you guys on creating for Anodos is like this cosmos, this space and just like the unending infinite. And for me, that's always just been like this source of awe and wonder and inspiration my whole life. And there's when we're very earthly minded in the sense of what we're spending our time with and giving our spirit towards, we kind of stay in that plane, and so we were saying, I like what you said about mining the depths. You got to mine, you got to dig in and get deeper and deeper to find those things of true spiritual value. And these are the things that I believe we have to offer if we truly have the faith that we are serving this God of the infinite and of so much that we have yet to understand and explore. To assume that we have got enough, and so one of the other C.S. Lewis quotes about this is, I'm going to mess the quote up because it's a long one, but
I guess that's my favorite one.
Yeah, he talks about like we're actually half-hearted. Our passions are actually not passionate enough. And I think a lot of Christians think, got to be careful of all the passions in the world, my desires for beauty or love or whatever it might be. And we kind of limit that and try to like restrain that. But his quote says, that's not our problem. We're actually half-hearted. We're too easily pleased with the comforts of sex and dramas and news and whatever else. But when we look to the infinite God, we'll realize that we're just settling for mud pies when a vacation at the sea is offered to us.
Wow, that's such a beautiful quote.
Right. And so for me, I think, and for other artists, it's like, there's so much more to explore. There's so much more to expand into, rather than, hey, be careful. You can only do these 3 things as a Christian. You got to watch yourself all the time, but let's mine the depths. Let's look to the cosmos and be like, have our minds blown and make our spirits available to something that is maybe terrifying in some ways, because it's going to expand us and challenge us sometimes, to get beyond just our whatever the little limited ways that we're operating on this earthly plane.
Yeah.
So that's what I try to inch towards in my own life as an artist, and not just looking to the world and being like, oh, these are the kind of films that people like. I want to make something like that, but or a song or whatever it might be. And I think for you with writing, I know you made a lot of ways making bold steps in your own community and doing something that was somewhat unheard of in that realm. And so just having the faith to just be like, I'm not just going to be okay with the status quo. And to kind of wrap this up a little on this little rant of, I think this is what artists are best at, kind of leading the way and challenging some ideas and throwing out like a grenade sometimes to the system that needs to be shaken up, and for eyes to be opened when we've fallen asleep a little too much.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a mouthful. But the infinite God just has so much more for us to discover as artists, and also our how. I mean, I mentioned in the last episode that I'm challenging myself, and I'm in conversation with God about this, to use techniques in my acting that are not the lazy, I have to do this scene, this intense scene, so I'm going to remember the last time I was sad and draw inspiration from that, or remember a little trauma from my childhood and just substitute that for here. Really, I think that there's got to be more. There's got to be another way. There's got to be another way that is new and just so much more abundant, and that's the God we serve. And I for one won't stop searching.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I will share this one moment of my life that I felt like was a worship-like experience, and it was very unexpected, and it was in movie theater. And have you seen the Mr. Rogers documentary? Do you know Mr. Rogers? Did you grow up with him at all?
Yeah, I did.
Did you?
But I haven't seen the documentary.
And I think this is, I wouldn't say like in terms of this conversation it was necessarily about challenging, but it was when we do something that's expansive and worshipful, what the magic can happen on the people we're next to when we engage in art. And so we watched this. I was in the theater in this documentary, which is beautiful. I highly recommend it. I forget what the title of it is, but it's the main documentary. I think Won't You Be My Neighbor is something like that. There was a couple that came out, but it's the one that had the most kind of run. And this man is just committed, and he was just committed to leaving a mark on meeting children at the level they're at and just loving them and providing something of them, basically a person who would talk to them and help them through the hardships in life. He wasn't playing to the lowest common denominator like a lot of other media was trying to do at the time. He was like very principled about, no, these are, we need to keep our kids safe, and help them to feel safe. They let them know the adults are in charge, but we're going to be very honest with them, and we're not going to like just throw a pie in my face, kind of a stuff. So he was very much about wanting to do something that was really meaningful, not relying on cheap gimmicks. And just his principles and his committed life to this mission as a very kind, soft-spoken man, and all the things he endured. And then, so many people part of the theater grew up with him as well. So, he's like a surrogate parent in many ways. But when it finally ended, and the credits rolled and the lights came on, everyone was just sitting there teary-eyed. And it was like, and it's in Los Angeles, and we're like looking at each other, and it just felt like everyone in that room, all these strangers, just wanted to hug each other. And
Wow.
and there was a really powerful experience of, hey, we just all saw something that touched our hearts, and I'm recognizing the person next to me and your value, and we're just way more connected together. And we saw this thing that's so beautiful that it made us, in fact, at that moment, much better people and more loving towards each other and seeing each other in that moment. And I hope there's more artists listening to this, or artists who are doing kingdom work, that are thinking about, in terms we talked about previously of glorifying God. Can we cultivate that? Can we bring people to that place of really reshaping just the way we even go about this? And I do believe it, as we're saying here, it's going to begin with our own space and what we're creating and feeding ourselves and putting our own mind and eyes on.
Right. I mean, yeah, my personal desire is really for my work to embody the presence of God, that multidimensional, holographic nature of God's presence. Just that beyond just the story I'm telling, that there will always be another quality of like, hey, what is that other thing? What is that other thing I'm experiencing? What is that other thing I'm feeling and seeing? And it doesn't have to always be a happy-go-lucky scene that's a fuzzy feeling scene. And that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that I guess I'm always trusting God for another quality to my work that points to his presence and his involvement in what I'm doing. Yeah. It's my desire.
Yeah. Well, I think to the point, it's not an exact science, right? So this is somewhat of a relational and a spiritual practice, and sometimes you might nail it, and sometimes you might not. Sometimes you might think you didn't, but God still uses it.
Right.
Right.
So,
but that intention and that relationship you have with God, I think is first and foremost, and you surrendered it to God, and you said, this is what I'm going to be offering with my life and with my craft.
Yeah. There are moments, thank you for that. There are moments when I'm like, geez, I really, that wasn't great. God, please fix it in post. I always say that to him. God, fix it in post. Okay. Yeah. Send some angels to do some editing on that work.
Yeah. Well, if not, I'm not an angel, but you can send Jesse.
Definitely.
Should we wrap this up?
Yeah.
This is a good talk. So before we do that, one thing we'll mention is this is a ministry, and we're just going to keep on having these conversations. We have a lot more plans. We mentioned this last time, but we have more plans. We want to start getting together locally in Los Angeles, bringing people together.
Yeah.
The podcast and the films that we're putting out, you can support us in many ways. One would just be, hey, watch them, share them with people. There is a way to give on our website if you want to support us financially, so that we can put more production value into all the stuff that we're looking to create, so that it's not only a conversation, but it's also a representation that we want to make really compelling art, even if it's a short 2-3 minute film that exemplifies sort of what we're aiming for long-term with the films we're going to be creating. So that's just ways you can engage, support us. We want to know who's listening to this. We want to know more about your story, because that's just going to expand our capacity to see how God works and what he's doing through your artwork and in your story. Yeah.
And there are also going to be opportunities in future for you to share some of your work on our platforms, whether it's on our website or in person at our gatherings, where if you're wanting an opportunity to showcase your work and get live feedback from people, or start a conversation or a workshop type scenarios, we're looking at stuff like that to do in the future, and that's going to be quite exciting. So we will put out a call for people to submit their work.
Absolutely. Excited about that.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to a deeper exploration of the relationship between our faith and our art and the artist and the church. And we'd love to hear from you. So please share with us in the comment section how you use your gifts to glorify God, and how worship plays a role in how you do your art. So we also invite you to partner with us in any way that you feel led.
I Notice aspires to cultivate a world where the kingdom of God can find full expression in arts and entertainment. We do this by creating works with the main objective to flood the culture with the light and facilitate your participation through fellowship and gathering. Thank you so much for listening.